Kathy Gillespie, and I just wanted to share some recipes with you. This is one of the most requested recipes I've had. It's for my mama's yeast rolls. This is like a 1960s recipe, but I know that most yeast rolls are about the same anyway. But the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to talk about some of the ingredients that you'll need. This is what the recipe calls for. 3½ cups all-purpose flour, 1/4 cup sugar, 1 teaspoon salt, 3/4 cup milk, an egg, a package of yeast, and water, and a half a stick of butter. When we start, the first thing that I'm going to do is to get my yeast mixture ready. I use Fleshman's yeast, and that is 1 package for each recipe. Some people buy yeast in bulk, and that is fine. I usually do, but I wanted to show y'all what it's like with the package. To make yeast grow, you need sugar. The recipe calls for 1/4 cup of sugar, and I've got that measured out. I'm just going to add about a teaspoonful of that. It won't take away from the recipe. And I've got my yeast. I'm going to add it. Yeast is like a live fungus, and it grows in warm conditions with sugar. Sugar is its food. So I've got the sugar in there and the yeast, and I'm going to add 1/4 cup of water. And if you get a little bit more, it's not anything, it's not a deal breaker. I'm going to add some water in a little bowl so that I can just sort of use it as a water bath so that my yeast stays warm all the time that I'm trying to grow it. I'm going to stir it up a little bit to dissolve it in that water. My faucet is set at a low temperature. Yeast needs to be at 110 degrees. I mean, if it's 105 or 115, I doubt it would matter. But if you have really hot water from your spigot, then you need to get you a candy thermometer and measure and make sure that it's around 110. While that is growing, because it'll start foaming and growing, I'm going to put 3/4 cup of milk in my microwave. And my little microwave, it's not very strong, but I'm going to microwave it for 2 minutes. They tell you in the recipe to keep everything room temperature, and they tell you to put your egg out before room temperature and your butter and all that. But I find that if I scald my milk and then add the butter and the egg, it brings it down to the temperature that I need. While we're waiting on that, I'm going to sift some flour. It calls for 3½ cups flour, and you really don't need to measure your flour. You just put enough flour in there to make the recipe work. I think that it usually calls for a little bit, I think it usually takes a little bit less flour than it calls for. Then a teaspoonful of salt, and I'm a guesstimator, but if you're making it and you're not a guesstimator, it's a teaspoon. The rest of the sugar. And then I'm going to just stir up my dry ingredients. You can use any all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour doesn't have any leavening in it. I like to use King Arthur flour. It's pretty a high-grade cake flour. So that's my King Arthur flour. My yeast has started bubbling a little bit. When it bubbles, that shows you that it is an active culture, that it's still alive. If you have yeast too long, it can go bad. This yeast is dated March 27th, 2020, which means that I should toss it. But when I put it in this and it foams up, I can tell that it's still good and viable and I can use it. Waiting on my milk. I've got the milk out now, and I am going to cut up my butter in little slices so that it will melt. And this is a half a stick of butter, or 1/4 of a cup. And if you want to use Crisco, you can use Crisco instead of butter, but it would be 1/4 of a cup. When you make yeast rolls, the most important thing is the temperature. Keeping it at, a warm condition. That's why I put that yeast in that hot water bath. And I'm going to stir that up a little bit. The butter, if you get your temperature too hot, it'll kill the yeast too. So that milk was pretty hot, but that butter is going to cool it down. And then after I get the butter in there, I will also put an egg in there and incorporate it into this mixture, and it will cool it down even further. This morning I was making some and my butter didn't quite melt. I'd let my milk get too cool and I just put it back in the microwave for a little bit. But like I said, you don't want it too hot. If you get it too hot, you'll cook the egg when you put it in. But this is not too hot because you're just right now melting the butter. If you have to sort of stir that butter to get that butter melted, you know that the mixture is not just scalding hot. And then I'm going to crack an egg in it. And blend it in. So to recap, I've got probably about 2 cups of flour, 1/4 cup of sugar, teaspoonful of salt, 3/4 cup of milk, 1/4 cup of butter or 1/2 a stick, and 1 egg. And I'm going to pour that liquid into my flour. And this is 1/4 cup of warm water and the yeast and a little bit of sugar out of that 1/4 cup. I'll stir that up. You don't want to try to incorporate all the flour that it calls for because it'll make your dough dry, and you don't want a dry dough. Add, I don't know, that's probably about another cup. My dough is soft and still real moist. If I was to put my hands in it, it would stick to my hands all over. But you don't want it to get any thicker than that. Now I'm going to flour my surface. I got parchment paper down. Makes the cleanup a little bit easier. The way I cook, I'm sure I'll still get some all over my counters, but that's the purpose anyway. Now, the flour needs to be kneaded into this dough, and I just take my parchment paper and bring it over into the dough so I don't have to get my hands on it. Once you get enough flour in here, it won't stick to your hands. The dough's real smushy, and that's what you want it to be. When I first started making yeast rolls, they told me to knead it till it was smooth and elastic. I didn't know what smooth and elastic was. And I would just knead my bread and I'd get it really way too dry. So what I tell you to do is just knead it until the dough holds together. I'm going to wash my hands off and be right back with you. Get me a second bowl. I'm going to pour a little bit of olive oil in here. Anytime the dough hits the air without some moisture on it, it dries it out. So then I'm going to put the dough in there, and the oil's on the bottom. I'm going to flip it over so the oil will get on the top also. I'm going to put some saran wrap over it so the air won't dry it out. And then you let this raise for about an hour till it gets double in bulk. It doesn't have to get necessarily exactly double in bulk, but it does rise. What's this? I am a miser. I save everything. I learned that from my mama. So I'm going to save what flour I didn't use. Get all the chunks out of it. And put me down another piece of parchment paper. Okay, if your kitchen is cold, I put my dough in the oven, on a cold oven with a warm pan of water under it, and that helps it rise. You don't want your oven on. This is what I made before, and this is the same recipe, so you see how much fuller that dough is? I'll just show you. This is what I just made. This was an hour ago. So it's gotten really full and bubbly. Add a little bit more flour. They say punch it down and knead it, and the only thing you're doing is getting rid of the big air bubbles that has formed while it's raised. Yeast, as I said, was a live culture. When it raises, it puts off a gas. The yeast grows, and the byproduct is a gas, and that's the leavening portion of the yeast. I'll put that out, turn it out. It doesn't stick to the bowl much because we had that bowl greased. And we do it the same way we did it before. We bring that flour in on it so it won't stick to your hands. And then, some of it, I don't have it on my hands yet, but you might get some on your hands. I'm not saying you won't. This recipe can be made into yeast rolls for a dinner meal, or you can adapt it to a cinnamon roll recipe, and I might show you that on another video. Anyway, you just punch out those air pockets. Now I take my rolling pin and I roll it out to about a ½ inch thickness for the dinner rolls. If you're making cinnamon rolls, you roll it out as thin as you can get it. But we're going to make these dinner rolls. And I got my little trusty biscuit cutter. You dip your biscuit cutter for those of you who haven't cooked much, in flour so it won't stick to your rolls as you're making them, or biscuits, or whatever it is that you're working with. When you make, excuse me, when you make the cinnamon rolls, they don't stay fresh as long as these. I really don't know why, but these, once you bake these, if you put them like in a Ziploc bag, they will be good for probably 3 days and real soft. I've got an old pan here. I've been cooking for ages, and these work fine, so I don't see any point in buying more. I'm going to spray it just with an olive oil or any kind of vegetable oil and put my rolls in there. You will let these also raise till they're double in bulk. If you want to eat them right away, you just let them rise on the counter or in the oven as I showed you earlier. But if you want them for the next day, you just put them in the refrigerator and they will raise a little bit from the heat that's in them till you can just take them out of the refrigerator the next day and bake them. If you want them for 3 days after this, you can put them in the freezer and freeze them for a few days. Had a little visitor there. I got 3 grandchildren here. My daughter-in-law is filming this. So we were, Zeke is banging on the door one day. Okay. I will, well, I'll just do it right now. I'm going to go on and mix this up again so I can get a few more out of it. But it'll go in a different pan. I'm not going to show you that. I'm just going to go on and get this done. So you can see this made around 20 rolls, I guess. If you want a few more rolls than what it makes, all you have to do is increase your milk or your water in your yeast. You do not have to change the egg or the butter. You don't want to, I mean, you can't just go crazy with it and add a lot, but like if you wanted to do a cup of water, that's fine. Or, excuse me, a cup of milk, that's fine. Alright, now that I got this done, I'm going to spray these again. It's the same thing that olive oil did, so that the things won't stick to it. And I'm going to cover them with saran wrap again. And like I said, you let them raise in the refrigerator if you're not going to use them right away. And you let them raise on the counter if you're going to bake them within the hour. You bake these at 420 degrees till they're brown, which is like 15 to 20 minutes. And serve them with some good old jelly and butter. So, alright, this was the little sample pan that I baked so y'all could see what they looked like when they came out. Actually, the bigger pan will look better because these are some of the scraps of the dough. But I wanted to show you what it looked like. See how high and fluffy they are? We're going to peel that thing open. We're going to put some good old butter on it. My grandchildren are here. Maybe their mama will let them have one. And we're going to put a little bit of this homemade strawberry jelly. And that recipe might come at a different time. Makes me want to eat. I don't know about y'all. Isn't that delicious? That's the end of that. So, hope to see you. If you like this, I might start a YouTube video called Kathy's Kitchen. So if you want to see more recipes, just like and subscribe and share on your Facebook. Thank you so much.